Did she just smash a law enforcement surveillance feed with a metal pole? Deputy Ray blinked at the screen in disbelief, watching the final frame freeze on the wide-eyed face of an irate woman in a pastel-pink tracksuit. I was already halfway out the office door with my badge clipped on and car keys in hand. "That's Karen," I said flatly. "And she just turned a homeowners association complaint into a criminal investigation. It all began with a camera, a cul-de-sac, and one woman who thought the rules didn't apply to her, until she starred in her own episode of Law and Order, Neighborhood Edition. The neighborhood had always had its quirks. We were nestled in one of those suburban pockets where lawns were always exactly 2 inches high, driveways were power-washed every Sunday, and dogs weren't allowed to bark for more than 30 seconds. That wasn't a joke. Karen actually brought that rule to the HOA board last spring and somehow got it passed. If Stepford had a governing body, it would have taken notes from our HOA. And Karen? Karen was its iron-fisted, yoga-stretching, property line measuring tyrant. My decision to install a few smart cameras wasn't made lightly. I wasn't the paranoid type. I'm a tech consultant for the county sheriff's office, and I've seen enough real crime to understand the difference between reasonable caution and overreaction. But after 3 Amazon packages disappeared in 1 week, and after someone spray-painted, "Remove this monstrosity," on my utility box, I figured it was time to start collecting receipts. Literally and digitally. The cameras were sleek, small, motion-triggered, and streamed directly to both my home setup and, with a bit of extra back-end wiring, the sheriff's office feed. We had been testing remote monitoring systems in residential areas, and I figured my own home was a perfect beta site. It wasn't advertised, of course, that would have defeated the point. But the little glowing blue ring on the front lens was a dead giveaway to anyone with half a brain that this wasn't just a dummy cam. Karen, unfortunately, had slightly less than half. The first email came the next morning, a politely aggressive message from the HOA citing an unapproved security installation. Then came a knock at the door. I opened it to find Karen standing with a clipboard in one hand and her small dog, Muffin, shaking in her other arm like it had just witnessed a double homicide. She looked me up and down like I'd tracked mud onto her wedding dress. "We have very strict aesthetic codes, Mr. Weston," she said, gesturing to the camera with the tip of her pen like it might bite her. "This sort of tech surveillance equipment can intimidate neighbors, especially children." "It's facing my porch," I replied. "And your newsletter last week warned us about porch pirates." "I'm trying to help." She blinked. "That doesn't mean we need a Big Brother situation on Sycamore Lane." I was tempted to ask her if she even read 1984, but instead I smiled and pointed to the HOA charter I had already printed and highlighted in anticipation. According to Section 3.4c, outdoor security devices are allowed as long as they don't obstruct public walkways. Mine are within my boundary line. Karen pursed her lips so tight it looked like she was trying to swallow a lemon. She left without another word. Over the next few days, I noticed Muffin began pooping suspiciously close to my lawn ornament. Someone left HOA pamphlets stuffed in my mailbox, including outdated bylaws and exaggerated warnings about residential surveillance abuse. I ignored it. I had work to do, and petty HOA politics were background noise to me, until the day Karen's noise became impossible to ignore. It was Saturday. I was at the sheriff's office calibrating equipment when a motion alert pinged the central monitor. Deputy Ray and I both turned as one of my security feeds popped up. There, on the screen, was Karen, charging up my driveway like she was storming a castle. She didn't knock. She didn't shout. She just pulled a metal pole, one of those collapsible garden stakes, from her oversized tote bag and started swinging at my camera like it owed her money. We sat in silence for a moment as she smashed the unit clean off the siding. Pieces flew. The lens cracked. But even in its final seconds, the camera sent one last high-res image. Karen, face contorted in fury, staring straight into the blinking livestream icon. "Is that her real name?" Ray asked, mouth open. Unfortunately, yes. You want me to call this in? I want to personally bring her the bill. I raced back to my house and found the carnage right where the feed had cut out. The camera lay in fragments across the garden bed. The siding was dented. My mailbox flag had been snapped clean off too. Bonus damage, I guess. But what Karen hadn't realized was that the destroyed camera wasn't the only one watching. I'd installed a secondary cam tucked in the birdhouse across the yard, and it had caught everything from a better angle, including the swing, the smirk, and her dramatic exit where she nearly tripped on her own shoelace. By the time I pulled the backup footage and burned it to a thumb drive, the sheriff's office was already prepping a case file. I didn't need to push hard. Karen's face, recorded on a live-stream monitoring platform used in an active public safety pilot, was enough for them to flag it as interference with law enforcement equipment. And the best part? The entire stream had already been automatically backed up to the cloud. That evening, I sat on my porch with a lemonade in hand, watching the sun dip low behind my newly reinstalled camera. This one had a reinforced bracket. Karen's porch light flicked on across the street. She stood in the doorway staring at me, arms crossed. I gave her a small wave and pointed up at the lens. It blinked back, once, slowly. Blue. And Karen finally realized she'd just picked a fight with someone who had everything on tape. The silence in the neighborhood the next morning was eerie. Normally, by 9 o'clock, you'd hear someone leaf blowing, a kid getting hollered at for biking too fast, or a sprinkler clicking along on a schedule Karen had personally approved. But that day? Not a peep. It was as if everyone collectively decided to tiptoe around the ticking bomb that was about to go off. Because word travels fast on streets lined with nosy neighbors and HOA gossip chains. And when the sheriff's department cruiser pulled up to Karen's driveway that morning, it was like dropping a live grenade into a box of wine. Karen had clearly expected a routine morning. She was in her robe, holding muffin, and talking to another neighbor when the deputies stepped out. She tried her usual charm, smiling, hands on hips, pretending like the law showing up at her house was some big misunderstanding. But the deputy didn't fall for it. He handed her a printed photo, a still frame of her caught mid-swing, face wild, camera fragments flying. Her smile dropped. She glanced across the street, saw me sipping coffee on my porch, and turned a shade of pale that even SPF 100 couldn't block. She wasn't arrested yet, but she was warned. Officially. The report was filed as malicious destruction of property with potential interference in a public surveillance test, which might sound bureaucratic, but when it came out at the next HOA meeting, it sounded like music. Karen stormed inside, slammed the door, and blinds were immediately drawn. And just like that, Sycamore Lane's reigning queen bee was suddenly a recluse. But no one was fooled. If anything, the community's curiosity was piqued. Later that afternoon, I received a knock at the door. I assumed it might be another neighbor asking for details or offering popcorn, but to my surprise there stood Karen, her demeanor dramatically different. Gone was the clipboard warrior. In her place was a woman trying to look vulnerable, carrying a tray of cupcakes that were clearly from the supermarket and still sealed in plastic. Muffin wasn't with her. I opened the door and let her speak first. "Hey," she said with the kind of tight smile people reserve for awkward holiday dinners. "I, wanted to apologize. Things got a little out of hand yesterday." "You don't say," I replied, not moving from the doorway. She held out the tray. "Cupcake." I looked at it, then back at her. "Are they booby-trapped?" Her smile twitched. "Very funny. Look, I didn't know your camera was part of a sheriff's program. I thought it was just, another homeowner trying to film everyone for no reason. So that made it okay to destroy it?" She hesitated. "No. I got carried away. I've been stressed." "Karen," I said calmly, "you're not being sued for being stressed. You're being investigated for swinging a metal pole at a recording device that streams to law enforcement. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a felony." The cupcakes started to tremble slightly in her hands. She looked down, as if practicing a scene from a courtroom drama where she was the misunderstood protagonist. Can we just forget this happened? As neighbors? It's better for the whole community if this doesn't go further. I leaned against the doorframe. You really want this to go away? Yes, she said too quickly, her voice hopeful. Absolutely. Then you should probably start with the HOA board. Because they'll be seeing the footage at the next meeting. Her face fell. You wouldn't. I would. And I already did. She turned and walked away, the tray still in her hands, forgotten cupcakes wobbling with every angry step. As soon as she was back inside, I heard the sound of a slammed door and what might have been a scream muffled by thick curtains. I couldn't be sure. I wasn't the only one who witnessed her tantrum either. Apparently, a couple of neighbors had caught her original camera assault on their phones too, just from different angles. The sheriff now had enough visual evidence to stage a multi-camera breakdown if he wanted. Karen was on cinematic display. The next few days were strange. Karen went on a full-blown PR campaign. She sent out an apology newsletter through the HOA mailing list, a typed single-page document titled, "Let's Move Forward Together." It was full of half-apologies, vague references to misunderstandings, and flowery language about unity. But what cracked everyone up was that she spelled my name wrong 3 times and called my camera an aggressive digital sentinel. One neighbor said it sounded like she was fighting the Terminator, not an outdoor nest cam. But her charm offensive didn't last long. The board had received the footage, and they were not impressed. Apparently, Karen had been walking a thin line for years, harassing other residents over garden gnomes, blocking pool access over unpaid fines, even trying to get a single dad evicted because his Christmas lights exceeded lumens. She had always gotten away with it thanks to her manipulation and fear tactic. But now, with actual video evidence and a sheriff's report backing it, the tide had turned. At the HOA meeting, Karen arrived early and tried to take her usual seat at the head of the table. But the board president, Frank, normally her biggest supporter, gently told her to take a regular chair. Her face flushed again. I sat near the back with several neighbors who hadn't attended a meeting in years but showed up with popcorn this time. Frank stood, cleared his throat, and then dimmed the lights. And then he hit play. The footage rolled like a highlight reel from a bad reality show. Karen marching up the lawn. Karen swinging wildly. Karen screaming something about spy tech ruining the neighborhood. Every gasp in the room felt like applause. She interrupted once, tried to explain, but Frank silenced her with a raised hand. "Let's all see the full context," he said firmly. After the video ended, there was a long pause. One board member muttered, "Holy crap." Another whispered, "She's unhinged." Then Frank announced that a motion had been raised to formally censure Karen for misconduct and abuse of authority. They couldn't vote to remove her just yet. That required a full community vote, but the wheels were turning. And for once, they weren't turning in Karen's favor. She stood up to respond, visibly shaking. "This is a coordinated attack," she said, eyes darting around the room. "This is surveillance terrorism. He's violating our rights. It's harassment." Frank nodded toward me. "You mean the guy whose property you vandalized?" "I was protecting my community." Another board member stood. "By attacking a sheriff-monitored device?" "Karen, this isn't about community anymore. It's about you." Karen left the meeting in tears. For the first time in years, she didn't stay to take questions or hand out HOA citations like candy. And as people filtered out of the meeting room, there was a strange buzz in the air, like the first breath after a storm had passed. People smiled. Someone joked about setting up a community movie night with the footage. Another neighbor high-fived me. The reign of Karen was starting to crack, and the hammer she used to rule? It had just smashed her right in the face, on camera, in high definition, with multiple backup angles. The following morning brought a different kind of tension to the neighborhood. Not the usual fear of Karen's clipboard of doom or surprise fines for parking too close to a mailbox, but an unusual, electric anticipation. For once, people weren't worried about who was in trouble. They were waiting to see what Karen would do now that she was. Her pristine white SUV didn't leave the driveway, her porch light stayed off, and even Muffin wasn't walked that day. But while Karen might have gone silent, the retaliation had only just begun. It started with something small. My mailbox, which had survived years of weather and HOA drama, suddenly wouldn't open. A quick inspection revealed someone had crammed it full of sticky candy wrappers and glue. The next morning, my motion sensor pathway lights were pulled out and tossed into my flower bed like weed. Then came the real kicker. Someone smeared peanut butter into the electronic lock on my side gate, jamming it beyond repair. The entire neighborhood knew Karen didn't own a dog with opposable thumbs or a peanut butter obsession, and the timing was too suspicious to ignore. She was striking back, not with open rage this time, but with stealthy, childish sabotage. I didn't confront her, not yet. I knew the best way to deal with someone like Karen wasn't to escalate, but to document. So I installed more cameras. Not just any cameras. These were birdhouse cams, lawn ornament cams, even a small dummy rock that actually recorded in 4K. Every inch of my property became a movie set, with Karen as the likely future star. And just to ensure the tech didn't raise alarms, I made sure everything looked subtle. The mailbox cam was triggered by vibration. The porch sensor fed a live stream directly to an encrypted drive. I wasn't just protecting my property now, I was building a case. Meanwhile, the HOA board had started to shift in attitude. Frank, the president, called and asked if I'd consider joining a new residential technology subcommittee, which was his polite way of saying, "We need someone who knows what they're doing to clean up the mess Karen left behind." I politely declined but agreed to advise when needed. What I didn't tell Frank was that I was already coordinating with the sheriff's office to provide weekly summaries of Karen's escalating behavior. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. It was a pattern. Karen didn't stay quiet for long. A few days after the HOA meeting, I saw her walking with purpose down the street, clipboard in hand, but this time without her usual smug expression. She looked rattled, like someone had pressed fast forward on a game she thought she controlled. She passed my house, didn't make eye contact, and headed toward the community pool, where a group of kids were hanging out after school. I wasn't sure what her angle was until I got a call from one of the parents later that evening saying Karen had demanded they sign out their kids for unauthorized congregating. It was so absurd it would have been funny if she hadn't tried to enforce it with fake HOA violation slips. Things escalated when I caught her tampering with my garage sensor. She was subtle, crouching low at night in a hoodie and gloves, clearly aware she might be watched. But what she didn't know was that one of my newest cameras had a motion-activated spotlight and an audible alert. The moment she touched the unit, the light snapped on and a robotic voice said, "Warning, recording in progress." She flinched like she'd been struck, then bolted down the driveway. The footage was gold. Even better, a neighbor's dash cam had caught her entering my yard. There was no denying it now. I sent the footage straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy on duty responded with a single sentence. "This is getting serious." That was the turning point. They started formal paperwork for a criminal mischief case, citing harassment, destruction of property, and unlawful trespass. The fact that she was a known figure in the community only made it more relevant. They needed to set an example. At the same time, I sent a sanitized version of the footage to Frank and the rest of the HOA board. They were appalled. One board member, Sheila, called me to apologize for years of letting her do whatever she wanted. She said they were drafting a motion for emergency removal from her position pending a full neighborhood vote. The winds had shifted, and Karen's fortress of control was now made of paper and wishful thinking. But the most satisfying moment came completely by accident. One Saturday afternoon, a local ice cream truck pulled up and parked right in front of Karen's house. It was a hot day, kids swarmed, parents mingled, and for once the atmosphere on Sycamore Lane was relaxed. That's when I noticed something strange. Karen was standing at her front window, scowling. Then she came storming out, yelling about unauthorized vendors and food licensing, and demanding the truck leave. The driver was confused. He'd been serving that route for 5 years. That's when one of the kids' moms, who happened to be recording her son getting a popsicle, caught the whole confrontation on video. Karen tried to yank the driver's permit clipboard, knocked over a stack of cones, and slipped on her own front step trying to retreat. No one helped her up. People were tired. And once the video hit the neighborhood Facebook group, it became clear Karen had finally lost the last thread of control she was desperately clinging to. The sheriff's office contacted me again a few days later. With multiple reports, physical evidence, and video documentation piling up, they were preparing to press formal charges. Not just fines. Real charges. I was asked if I would testify if it came to court. I said yes, of course. But deep down, I didn't think it would get that far. Karen thrived on fear and power, but she crumbled under exposure. And the more the neighborhood saw her clearly, the less control she had over anyone. By the end of the week, Karen had retreated almost completely. Her porch lights stayed off, her car never moved, and her once daily patrols stopped altogether. It was like watching a cartoon villain realize their schemes had backfired in real life. But I didn't let my guard down. I knew better. Because people like Karen didn't give up, they regrouped. They rebranded. They found new ways to cause problems. But I had something she never did: patience, strategy, and a digital fortress with eyes in every direction. And if she ever stepped out of line again, she'd be recorded, archived, and sent directly to the very people she tried to manipulate. The neighborhood was changing. Karen was losing. And for once, the HOA had stopped looking the other way. A week after the ice cream truck incident, the sheriff's office officially filed the charges. Karen was now facing counts of criminal mischief, vandalism, trespassing, and interfering with a public safety device. It was no longer neighborhood gossip or HOA tattletales. It was real, legal, and on record. The news sent ripples through the community, not just because someone had finally stood up to her, but because nobody thought she'd ever face actual consequences. 4 years, she had operated with the smug confidence of someone who thought she'd never be touched. But now, the walls were closing in, and this time, she couldn't hide behind fine print or HOA rules. She would have to answer to a judge. I received the subpoena the same day she did. It was a strange feeling, holding a formal document that told me exactly when and where I'd be standing to testify against her. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I had all the footage labeled and sorted, time-stamped and backed up. The sheriff's department had copies. The HOA board had copies. I had even prepared a slideshow to walk through the highlights if it came to that. Karen wasn't just being taken to court, she was being taken apart piece by piece, in front of the very community she once ruled with an iron clipboard. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early and sat quietly near the front of the courtroom. Karen came in through the opposite door, dressed in a beige pantsuit that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle or a real moment of humility. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he advertised during late-night poker tournaments, followed close behind. He was loud, sloppy with his files, and already smirking like he thought this would be an easy win. Karen didn't even look at me. She kept her eyes straight ahead, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. The judge entered, called us to order, and then listened as the sheriff's deputy laid out the chain of events. The footage from the camera smash played first. Then the garage sensor incident. Then the footage from the disguised birdhouse cam. Every angle was clear. Every moment undeniable. Karen's lawyer tried to object on the basis of privacy violation, but the judge quickly shot it down. These were my property, my devices, and legally operated under state code. Not only that, but one was part of an officially sanctioned law enforcement program. The judge actually paused and raised an eyebrow when that detail came up. You could almost hear the gavel twitch in his hand. Then came my turn. I explained everything, From the first passive-aggressive note to the cupcakes to the increasing acts of vandalism and sabotage. I made it clear I wasn't targeting her out of personal vendetta, but for the sake of neighborhood safety. I told the truth, plainly and calmly, and I could feel the tide of the room turn in my favor. Even Karen's lawyer started to look less confident by the minute. Then the sheriff took the stand. He confirmed the legitimacy of the surveillance program, explained the policy for data collection, and outlined how Karen's actions disrupted ongoing tests and violated public trust. His voice was steady, authoritative, and impossible to refute. He ended his statement by saying, "Her behavior not only compromised private property but jeopardized community safety initiatives. That's not just wrong, it's dangerous." The judge didn't even need to deliberate long. He ruled in favor of restitution for property damages, community service to be served in a public-facing position, and a public apology to be submitted in writing to the HOA board and distributed to every resident. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a cactus. Her lawyer tried to soften the impact, asked for the charges to be dropped to misdemeanors, but the judge held firm. The vandalism of a law enforcement-connected device and the pattern of harassment removed any leniency. Karen turned toward me as we were dismissed. For a brief second, I saw something in her expression that almost looked like recognition, not remorse exactly, but realization. Like she finally understood she wasn't untouchable anymore. Then she looked away, adjusted her blazer, and left the courtroom without saying a word. The apology letter arrived in our mailboxes the following week. It was typed, obviously dictated by a lawyer, and barely passed for sincerity. But the court had ordered it, and it was enough to satisfy the legal requirement. That might have been the end of it, except Karen couldn't help herself. Some of the envelopes included glitter, an old internet prank. Annoying, messy, and childish. It wasn't dangerous, just obnoxious. But it was enough for the sheriff's department to consider it document tampering. Another warning was issued. Another note placed in her file. Her stunt had backfired again, and this time the HOA board was watching closely. After the apology stunt, Frank invited me to a private HOA board session. It wasn't about another complaint or dispute, it was an offer. The board wanted me to take Karen's vacant seat. Several neighbors had personally requested it. I thanked them but declined. I wasn't interested in governing other people's hedges or being dragged into debates about mailbox paint colors. But I did offer to serve as the board's tech advisor, helping install fair-use community surveillance and digital protections. That idea was met with unanimous approval. The neighborhood began to shift. The rules were re-evaluated, the citations reviewed, and several absurd policies overturned. People began to speak more freely at meetings. The fear of getting slapped with a violation for leaving a recycling bin out for an extra hour was gone. Karen, once the loudest voice in the room, was now a silent shadow. Her house sat dark most evenings, blinds closed, porch light off. She still lived there, technically, but her power had vanished. One weekend, while walking past her place with a neighbor, I noticed a new camera installed above her garage. It looked like a ring cam. Sleek. Modern. The same model I'd once used. The same one she'd destroyed. I chuckled quietly and kept walking. The irony was rich, but I didn't need to say a word. She was living in the world she tried to punish me for embracing. Now she relied on it for her own safety. I never celebrated outwardly. I didn't throw a party or post the courtroom videos online, though many neighbors joked about it. What I felt wasn't triumph, but peace. Not the kind that comes from revenge, but from resolution. I had stood up to someone who had bullied an entire community, and I'd done it with the truth, technology, and a little bit of patience. The final detail I added to my property was a wooden sign, small and simple, staked next to my new camera. It read in clean red letters, "Smile. The sheriff's watching." And just beneath it, in smaller font, "Thanks, Karen." It stayed there all year. It had been a month since Karen's court ruling, and the neighborhood had never felt lighter. People walked their dogs with actual smiles, kids played basketball in driveways again without fear of being cited for noise violations, and for the first time in years, someone dared to host a barbecue on their front lawn. It wasn't that Karen had moved, she was still very much present, lurking behind drawn curtains, but her grip on the community had shattered. What remained was a street cautiously relearning how to breathe. The HOA meetings had become actual discussions instead of lectures, and neighbors who had once whispered now spoke freely, often laughing about the past like survivors of a ridiculous suburban dictatorship. Still, despite the peace, I didn't forget the chaos she'd caused, and I knew deep down she wasn't finished. People like Karen rarely retire quietly. They wait, watching for cracks in the wall so they can slither back through. My cameras stayed up. Not out of paranoia, but out of good sense. They weren't hidden anymore. In fact, I'd added tasteful signage that read, "Live monitored for community safety," near my mailbox. One neighbor even asked if I could help him set up a similar system. Before long, half the block had at least one smart camera pointing outward. It wasn't surveillance anymore. It was mutual protection, born from the ashes of one person's tantrum. And Karen hated it. I knew because I'd see her peek from behind her blinds, scowl at the signage, then quickly vanish like a groundhog who spotted its shadow. There was no HOA bylaw left to stop us. She'd burned every bridge, and was now isolated in the very neighborhood she once dominated. The video footage had never gone public officially, but someone, I still don't know who, leaked a short compilation onto Reddit under the thread, HOA Karen vs. Security Cam. Who wins? It didn't take long to blow up. The thread exploded with comments ranging from disbelief to sheer hilarity. Someone remixed her camera smash into a dubstep beat. Another user looped her slipping on her porch with the caption, "Instant Karma, HOA Edition." The video hit 1 million views in under 2 days. Karen never acknowledged it publicly, but 2 days after it went viral, she canceled her lawn service and began receiving packages with no visible deliverman. It didn't take a genius to figure out she was trying to avoid being spotted outside. Around that same time, Frank from the HOA reached out again, not with another invitation to join the board, but with news. The board had reviewed old fines and citations Karen had issued during her time as vice president. Dozens of them were found to be illegitimate. Residents were being refunded. In some cases, Karen had used fake committee votes to push through personal vendettas, an overgrown bush here, a Halloween decoration she disliked there. One resident even found that Karen had been fining him over a swing set that didn't exist anymore. The board decided to issue a formal community-wide apology for their past inaction, and a new oversight system was introduced. No single board member would ever again have unilateral power. It was the kind of change people had only dreamed of, and now it was real, thanks to the chaos she had unwillingly unleashed. Then came the moment none of us expected. Karen sold her house. There were no for sale signs, no open house, no fancy flyers, just a sudden appearance of a moving truck early one morning, and a dozen cardboard boxes lined up on her porch. A few neighbors stood quietly on the sidewalk, watching from a distance as 2 men hauled furniture into the truck. Karen emerged just once, carrying Muffin in a tote bag and barking orders at the movers. Her face was drawn, her hair pulled back tight, and her eyes avoided every window on the street. She moved quickly, speaking only to the crew, and didn't even look up when one of the kids across the street shouted, "Bye, Karen." She stepped into the passenger side of a black SUV, and without so much as a wave, they pulled off. And just like that, she was gone. The collective celebration wasn't loud. No one threw a party or lit fireworks, but there was a shared sense of relief that hung in the air like the first breeze after a humid storm. Someone left a thank you note on my porch, handwritten and folded neatly. Another neighbor baked me a loaf of banana bread with a sticky note that read, "To our favorite digital superhero." I didn't need praise, but I appreciated it. What mattered most was that the community had found its voice again, and no one would ever let someone like Karen take it away. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The HOA meetings became shorter and more productive. Kids started a little Saturday bike club. Frank installed new benches in the park area. And one morning, someone added a new sign under the community entrance plaque. It read, "Welcome to Sycamore Lane. Now Karen free." It was clearly a joke, and it was removed within a day, but not before at least 6 people took pictures and shared them in our neighborhood group chat. Even Frank couldn't help but laugh when he saw it. As for me, I kept my cameras, not out of fear, but pride. What began as a tool to stop package theft had become a symbol of standing up to a bully. I added one final touch to the setup, a motion-activated speaker that played a short clip when someone approached the porch. It wasn't a siren or a recorded message. Just a cheerful voice that said, "Smile. You're on camera. Unless you're Karen, then run." It became a running joke in the neighborhood, and even the mailman said it made his day. The HOA drama faded into the background. The board was balanced, the rules were fair, and neighbors actually started helping each other again. Lawns were mowed without stress. Decorations stayed up without citations. And the once fearful hush that came with the sound of Karen's footsteps had been replaced by the casual chatter of a community rediscovering its unity. But the real full-circle moment came a few months later. A new family moved into Karen's old house. They were young, friendly, and waved at everyone they saw. On moving day, I walked over to say hello. The dad laughed when he saw the camera on my roof. "We saw the Reddit thread," he said. "Didn't realize it was this neighborhood." "That was you." I grinned. "Guilty as charged." He nodded, smiling. "We'll be keeping our ring cam too. Looks like your street has good instincts." And as I walked back home, I realized something simple but powerful. Justice hadn't come from yelling or threatening or retaliating with the same cruelty. It had come from evidence, patience, and standing firm. The cameras hadn't just recorded Karen, they'd revealed her. And when the truth came out, she did the rest of the work herself. In the end, I didn't need to destroy Karen's reputation. I just had to press record,